listening to The Starting Zone. This is The Starting Zone's live call-in show where we hear questions from you, our patrons. And now, here are your hosts.
Well, hello and welcome to The Starting Zone, the podcast about World of Warcraft for people who play it. Today is June 24th, 2022, and my name is Spencer Downey. Thank you so much for listening and subscribing to the podcast. As you heard Coltrane mention there in the opening, this is our June patron Q&A episode. So we welcome all of our patrons who have submitted questions and who potentially might come in live. Jason, how are you doing this evening?
Spencer, hello. I'm doing well. It's been kind of a long week, but we're here. It's been a roller coaster week for WoW stuff, so that's exciting. You know, stuff is really starting to spin up now for sure on several different fronts. But man, I don't know. Stuff has been real life has been just nonstop for me of late. So I'm hanging in there. WoW has been a bit of an oasis, as it tends to be. So that's good.
Good. Yeah, it's been a heck of a week for me in real life, and then in WoW, it's been a little bit calmer. We did our achievement run for jailer stuff.
Nice.
So we now have all the achievements done and got our mounts, and we're riding around on those. So that was nice to get that out of the way. There's some fun ones in there. It's always neat to see which raid achievements they put in. The jailer one's interesting because you actually, when you jump into the holes to get knocked up into the air, you have to jump into strategic ones. So when you get knocked up in the air, you fall through an orb that's hovering in the air above the holes and pick up that orb.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So
as long as you can do all of the achievements in one lockout,
you can, yes.
That's good. I don't like it when they have ones that are like, well, on week 1 do this, and on week 2 do this, on week 3 do this, and on week 4 do this, and then you can get your achievement. Like, yeah, they haven't done one of those in a while, but yeah, I like it better when you can just do it, you know, however you want to do it.
They're definitely
like on your own time frame, basically.
Yeah. The pain in the butt one for a raid of any, you know, substantial size. I think we had 23 people or 24 people or something doing it on normal. Was Paragons, because they had you have to peddle the corgis. So every time a corgi spawns from the wild rush, you have to click on the corgi, and everyone who's within like 5 to 8 yards of you, it says like 15 or whatever in the tool. It's not. It's like 5 to 8 yards of you, gets a buff saying that you've pet a corgi, and everyone in the raid has to get 4 of these. And so you have to like wait until everyone in the raid has been close enough to a corgi while it's being pet to get enough stacks. By the end of it, I think we had some people who had like 9 stacks by the time someone got 4, just because it's tricky enough to get everyone coordinated enough to be close enough to be able to do it.
You're just like fighting the enrage timer on an achievement like that. It's like,
well,
all right,
it kind of
these spawns we deal with.
It kind of was, because you also have the ramping damage during that phase coming off of the other boss. So you end up in a situation where your raid is taking like 4,000 damage every second or whatever it is. And you only have 4 of those little blooms that you can make, and then they slowly have other ones respawn later on. So like you do need to bring enough healers to just keep people alive long enough to get everyone the 4 stack buff. That was one of the semi longer ones to accomplish. And then Dos Agni was another interesting one, where this is where DPS is a really big factor, because the goal is you kill one of the big elites that's over on one of the side platforms before you arrive at Dos Agni's platform, and they drop an orb. And you have someone pick up that orb, and they have to carry it throughout the entire boss fight while not being hit by a ring. So you basically pick a mage, because they can blink, and you make them take Venthyr so they can have, you know, even more blinks. And if you have enough damage, then you're only going to deal with 2 or 3 rings, so it's not too hard for them to dodge all of them. But they're it's entirely on them. They have to make it through the whole phase that way. So yeah, there's I think 3 of them that involve you dragging something or getting something from outside of the boss and bringing it into the boss fight.
Yeah, they've been doing that more and more over the years, which is okay. I mean, you know what? I don't love that achievement design, but I will take it over. Do this thing slightly differently on 4 different weeks.
Yeah.
As long as I can just go in the raid and do it.
Well, then you get people desynced, because like someone was there for weeks 1 and 3, but they weren't there for week 2, which means now they
and they got to do week 2 3 different times, or it's I don't know. I sort of understand why they went that direction at one point in time, but it does seem like they moved away from it, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah. Anyways, we're here to chat with our patrons, so we're going to dive into that. We actually have Stoke waiting in the waiting room. But before we do bring in Stoke, let's answer the question that we initially asked all of our patrons so that we can do that before getting Stoke in here. So, thoughts on raid balance and tuning. Basically, our question to our patrons was, how do we feel about the current balance of raid tuning that's been going on as far as the amount of nerfs that have been happening to the levels of raid out there? And what do we feel about the raid difficulties in general when it comes to, is heroic too easy, too hard? Is, how accessible should mythic be, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's kind of a hard to put together into one question because it's kind of a broad topic, but it's the topic that's been bouncing around the internet the most over the past 3 weeks. And it's something that I feel like weighing in on in an episode where we can kind of, dive into it and then get other people's opinions on it is a great way to do it. So, all right. I mean, I'll start off first with my Mythic Raider perspective, which is what I wanted to classify up front. I feel like I am absolutely fine with them increasing our power level or nerfing raid bosses to make content easier over time so it's easy to re-clear. I really dislike it when the nerfing happening to the content changes the entire dynamic of what that boss fight is. I don't mind when they make mechanics pretty much obsolete. Like, oh, well, normally you have to really worry about, not going above 3 stacks of these soak puddles or whatever it is, right? And now it's like you can get 6 and like you don't die to it. It's fine. That I don't mind. You still have to soak the puddles. You still have to do whatever it is. Like, that's fine. When they just completely remove or negate mechanics entirely, like Halandris being the example that just keeps coming back around, of like the bombs just being like a non-issue now for people. The boss health is so low that you're just pushing through phases. And a lot of the AoE damage and whatnot is so low that you're not even needing to really heal through it. Like, they just dramatically changed how that boss feels. And by changing how the bombs work in general, they basically change the boss fight. Like, it doesn't feel like the same fight. And that's unfortunate. I think the changes that have happened to Anduin are a better representation of what I like to see, where you still have to do the mechanics and do them properly. The affordance around doing all those mechanics is just being easier and easier. The debuff lasts a bit longer, and not like they didn't make it so it's like, oh yeah, you get a purple circle and you get the yellow circle and you can have those debuffs for 45 seconds and you can just bump into people when you're comfortable bumping into people, right? Like that to me is the Halandris example of Anduin. Like, they basically took the bomb mechanic and went, yeah, you know what? You can just hold on to this bomb for so long and leave it on the ground for so long that it's not really something you need to pay attention to at all. If they did that with Blasphemy on Anduin, it would be a similar thing. But what they sort of did is went, all right, they took it from 8 seconds and it went up to like 14 or 16 or whatever it is, depending on what difficulty you are. And so that you still feel pressure to complete the mechanic quickly, but you don't feel like you just don't even have to worry about the mechanic. Like, whatever, we'll just push them to the next phase before we even need to worry about, bumping into each other and clearing these debuffs. So I appreciate good tuning when it comes to that kind of tuning. I think in general, I dislike the word mythic. And I talked about this a little bit on this week's episode, I think, where I feel like mythic in general, just the word mythic is a gate to content in its own, because whenever someone thinks of that, they think of, Team Liquid or Echo or these really high-end teams who do content. And basically it's like thinking, you know what, whenever I hear basketball, I think of the NBA players. So I'll just never touch basketball because I'm not as good as them. Like, you're like, oh, well, no, when you think basketball, you can, do whatever you want on your own in your own realm of difficulty, and there's different leagues and different scaling and different seriousness, and people need to look at mythic content more in that framework of, it's not the NBA or nothing, it's the NBA is that top percent, but there's all these other leagues below it, all the way down to, hey, I'm just gonna hang around in my backyard and shoot this basketball into these hoops, which is your mythic zeros, if you will, version of that type of content. So I do feel like there's a stigma about Mythic that is in a lot of people's minds, and that in itself creates a gate for people actually accessing that content and wanting to do that content. The there's a whole other issue that I don't want to get too far into the weeds on this episode, because I think it's something I want to bring in guests to talk about at some point, of games in general and game design in general, of how much something should be hand-holding and how much something should be the player just needs to smash their face against it until they've learned enough to be able to actually, the quote-unquote get good, if you will, form of gameplay, like what old Mario games used to be, where there wasn't a way to be like, oh, well, we'll just, make this level easier, and we'll make this auto-scroll happen slower, and we'll make this, way more accessible for players. It was, no, it is what it is, and you do it, and if you can't do it, then you need to get better at it to be able to do it, or you stop playing the game. It's one or the other. And there's some different perspectives on that. So I'm gonna steer away from that if I can, unless it comes up in some of our Patreon questions later on. But when it comes to raid balance and tuning, I think what you've mentioned many times on the show, Jason, is they've done a really good job this tier of doing consistent tuning, frequent tuning, and addressing issues pretty quickly. I think the Halondrus bug right now that still exists is probably one of the worst things I've seen. That's really weird. We were doing Halondrus on normal for that achievement run, and if you rotated your camera while inside the last room, the floor disappeared, and you could see panels disappearing of the tiles on the floor. That still needs to get resolved, because that's really weird, and it also means you can't do some of the achievement depending on what the floor is doing, which was very weird, because the stuff you need to pick up disappears as well. But as far as tuning and balancing goes for the raid, they've been pretty active at it. I think the larger issue is this raid just came in too hot. And I think that's something that we're going to talk a lot more about during this episode today, is how hot should raids come in? How difficult should the standard be? Like where the starting point is for a raid, where should that starting point land for different people and how they feel about it? Jason, how about you? What's your thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, I mean, this is a tough one. I think, I think that you have to basically pick a direction, right? When you talk about coming in hot, and this raid definitely came in way too hot in a variety of ways and for a variety of reasons. But it's kind of the safe decision, because you can always nerf. And even if people are unhappy with the initial tuning or whatever, they're probably not going to bounce off of a raid in 2 weeks if it's not tuned acceptably, right? They're going to give it a couple weeks and see how it goes and power up a little bit. And obviously the developers are looking at that as part of the process as well, and looking at kill rates and everything like that. You can't really afford to put out fights on live that are unintentionally way easier than you thought they would be, and then buff them. You can't do that, and there have been situations where certain mechanics or certain bosses have been essentially buffed, mostly via bug fixes or something.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go.
Removing some kind of unintended behavior or some kind of interaction that they didn't foresee, which effectively buffs the fight. Very rarely do you see actual tuning buffs to raid fights, but they have happened in the past. They're controversial and they suck. I'm sure they don't like having to do that, and it doesn't feel good as a player knowing that a thing that you killed last week is going to be harder this week. So, they kind of have to err on the side of making it harder versus making it easier. I think it seems like there's been a weird arms race between the devs and the very top 0.001% of the player base in recent years. Really, I think Xavius in Emerald Nightmare, that was that mythic tier was defeated the first week it was out. I think by the first weekend after the raid had come out on Wednesday in EU, that mythic Xavius was dead. That was sort of a black eye for the encounter team, I guess. They really didn't like that happened, and it was kind of a meme that, World First was that fast. And then also at the beginning of BFA, Race to World First became a live streamed event. You had corporate sponsors, you had these, big broadcast productions with rotating commentary teams and these live venues, and entire raid teams were, in this broadcast center. They were traveling to an event, and there was money involved, I guess is what I'm saying, right? And the first tier we saw that for was Old Deer, and I feel like since then there's look at end bosses since Cahoon, right? Jaina, obviously, and of course the whole thing with Jaina World First, that whole embarrassment of them sort of like live hot fix nerfing Jaina so that it could be killed. I don't even remember the name of the last boss in Crucible, but Crucible was like such a weird outlier anyway. Yeah, Unat. Yeah, that was like a whole other thing. I mean, we never even filled Alliance Hall of Fame on that because
it was like 38 teams, man.
Yeah, it was so out of control, right?
It's weird because of how out of control that was. It's still one of the tiers where I'm like, I was there. That's still like one of those tiers that I do that on of. We killed Unat. We're in that Hall of Fame. I was there. I'm proud of that.
I mean, a lot of people just didn't even bother with that.
Oh yeah.
What difficulty they play on because it was so wacky. The gear was interesting but weird. It wasn't like straight up good.
Yeah.
And the fights were really wacky and hard. And then from there you go straight into Queen Ashara, which on this show and on other shows, we spent quite a lot of hard drive space talking about that fight, right? Like that was a complex and ridiculous mess that you couldn't do without
recourse. You had to have them. Yeah.
Yeah, you couldn't do it without tools, basically. Yeah. Even on like normal, it was really tough to do without like substantial tool assistance. N'Zoth was a little bit better, but still pretty complex. And then, Denathrius and Sylvanas are fights that I don't want to say I can't stand them, but I really am not fond of those two fights. Jailer, I think, is quite a bit better than those two fights in that regard, at least. But, you can kind of see there's been this trend. Like these end bosses have just gotten so ridiculously complex and punishing and just not fun. Like Sylvanas was not fun to re-clear week in and week out. Ashara was not fun to re-clear week in and week out. And, these are the bosses that even for like a heroic team, especially at the end of an expansion, people want to come in and get, they want to get AOTC, they want to get mounts. Like once the content is old, like what is the point of it being so punishing to a practice team to have maybe, one or two people that don't really know the ropes in there? Like it should still be dying, I feel like, because the tuning needs to serve different needs for the content at different points in its lifespan, But like I said, when it comes out, it's got to be hard, because if it's too easy, then it's just going to die on the vine and you can't buff it. But once it's mature and once people are done progging it and once the prestige dries up, then it needs to be accessible in terms of difficulty so that people are encouraged to continue playing and enjoying the content. I think Sepulcher is just it's a problem on a bunch of levels because we talk about the power cliff that we fell off on the show all the time because we lost our domination buffs and we didn't have our set bonuses and we didn't have double legendary and we didn't have item level and all this stuff, right? And those were big power spikes going from single legendary to double legendary to 2-piece to 4-piece and then putting on 20, 30 item level. It's a completely different feel going in there, but also like, that's an issue. And that was more dramatic than in other parts of the game's lifespan. And I think that's a one-off for Sepulcher. Like, I don't think we'll see that particular set of circumstances come in again where it feels that bad transitioning into a new tier.
Well, I would also, I also want to emphasize as you, so if I can cut in for a sec, the thing that was just that we sort of discovered as we watched the Race to World First prog that was that there were certain bosses in this raid that were designed around you having your double legendary and designed around you having 2-piece or 4-piece. These top world teams could not kill certain bosses until they had received those items. Like you couldn't kill Jailer until you had 2 legendaries. That wasn't a thing. Like that's what started happening, right? It was you started seeing that the tuning for this raid on particular bosses wasn't just difficult because, hey, there wasn't enough affordance and there were too many one-shot mechanics and too much personal responsibility across too many mechanics on one boss. And some of the bosses were really long. On top of that, it was also that like the numbers of how tightly tuned stuff was to you being able to kill it and actually meet the DPS checks to make the fight killable were based around people having like their full set of gear or close to their full set of gear, which is not something we normally see either tuning wise. Typically tuning wise, if you're not quite, if you're 5 average eye level or 10 average eye level underneath of full mythic gear, the boss is still killable because it's not tuned that tightly. But we were seeing that with this raid tier.
Yeah. It's it's something that I think they're going to be able to avoid going forward, because if we're moving back to an era of class sets are just kind of assumed from tier to tier, like we pretty much know, like, okay, we haven't seen a Dragonflight item yet, okay? But we know that they're doing class sets in the first tier of Dragonflight. So you're going to have a pretty nice power spike at max level once you collect your set, and then you'll carry that into the next season, where you will then collect a new set that will hopefully be more powerful and upgrade your item level, right? So, like, that's avoidable. That was a quirk of sort of how stuff landed this expansion in some ways. We also talked a lot about how, 3 weeks for double legendary was too long, and 8 weeks for the catalyst was too long. And I feel like our complaints about that were valid. I feel like if we had gone in like week 2 or whatever, or started the raid with double legendary, that would have felt good. And I think if we would have had Creation Catalyst sooner, it would have felt really good. It's funny because Creation Catalyst was the thing that really mattered it mattered immensely for the first 8 weeks of the patch that it wasn't available. And then it mattered for about 4 or 5 more weeks, and now it doesn't matter at all. So, I think maybe we could have reduced that amount of time where we were just sitting there waiting for it to happen. I think the biggest problem with Sepulcher is actually not necessarily the tuning. I think the tuning is okay. I do think Heroic and Normal probably need another big tuning pass to just chunk everything down so we can ride out the summer and just encourage people to play and have fun. There's just so much complexity in so many of these fights. There's so many mechanics and overlaps and stuff going on in the rooms and things to look out for, and personal responsibility on 4 different mechanics that if, this person makes a mistake, that then they're dead and they killed 3 other people with them and you got to start over. And I don't really I think it's cool to have interactive mechanics and to have, you obviously have to present players with dangerous situations, right? The bosses are supposed to be hard. They're not supposed to fall over, but some of the bosses in Sepulcher don't really feel like they play fair, even after all of these changes. I've talked on the show about Anduin just being a miserable reclear on a weekly basis, we actually one-shot it this past week because we had a decent-sized squad and everybody was ready to go. So, it's a thing that when your players know what they're doing, like, yes, you can execute the dance, but, somebody has a brain fart or freezes up or something with blasphemy, and now you got to start over, or you don't have your CCs completely locked down and you got a 12-player group and 3 Grim Reflections spawn, and, you can't progress that fight. I think... Lords of Dread is another example of a fight that just has like these mechanics overlapping on top of each other over and over again. And, small mistakes kind of snowball into huge problems. And I think, it's the jailer fight is like that. That's okay because it's the last boss, right? Like if you lose people in phase 1 because you're not doing the bombs right, it has this domino effect. Because now you have fewer people, it's going to be harder to put enough damage into the boss in phase 2. You're going to be too far behind when you inevitably get to phase 3. You're not going to be able to handle the ads, and stuff's going to get out of control, and you're going to die. Okay, he's the last boss of the expansion, right? So, I think overall I would like to see kind of just more straightforward fight design. I don't know. We've kind of seen it all, I feel like, when it comes to WoW raid bosses. It's been a really long time. There are some interesting wrinkles in Sepulcher, but I don't really feel like any of the fights reinvent the wheel too much. The one thing they've been experimenting with more is making the room that you fight a boss in more part of the fight. And I think there's potential there, and I think that's cool when they can kind of, morph the room around what your team is doing, stuff like creating LOS on Jailer, for example. Like, that's cool. I like that direction, but... in some ways, I think they're just sort of throwing like kitchen sink levels of mechanics into fights that don't really need them. Like when you're doing an 11 boss raid, you don't need every boss to be this thing that you got to like pick through the dungeon journal and, isolate all of these different overlaps and have like cooldown rotations for and stuff. Like even on not prog, right? Even on for a reclear, do we have the coverage for, the 4th Mal'Ganis swarm? I don't know. One of our healers is out this week because they're on vacation. We're missing a raid CD. Maybe we just die. Like, It's a tough call. Like, they need to make fights that are interesting and challenging. I think they've gone a little too far off the deep end in terms of overall complexity, which then makes the fights harder to balance. So I'm kind of hoping for Dragonflight that we see slightly more straightforward fights. Even if they end up feeling kind of traditional, kind of safe in terms of design, I think that would be a good way to just kind of refresh the palette, right? And then if you want to start introducing weirder stuff, let us get into Dragonflight. Let us get situated with our talents. Let us get our intro tier 4-piece and just, kind of establish ourselves in the environment of Dragonflight before you start introducing wackiness. Like, give us a tank and spank boss, give us a dragon fight, give us, a 2-target cleave fight, and, let us just do some raiding and figure it out, and then bring some wackiness in. I don't really want a Stone Legion Generals and Denathrius in the first tier of Dragonflight, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I think we're going to get to that a little bit later in the show of what Season 4 is going to look like. I think that's a fairly valid thing of not wanting another Stone Legion Generals, especially the bugged version that initially existed that was terrible. But now that we've shared sort of our initial thoughts, obviously we're going to digest and expand upon all of these thoughts throughout the episode with all the questions and opinions you guys wrote in with. So let's bring in Stoke first, and we'll go over that now. Good evening, Stoke. How are you doing, sir? Oh, Stoke is muted. See if Stoke knows they're muted. Oh, there we
Hey,
go.
guys.
Hey, how's it going?
Yeah, man.
Good. How are you?
Doing well.
Yeah, it's been a while.
It's been a bit, and it's good to have you back.
Yeah, I'm glad to be back. I had a Friday evening free and figured I'd pop in and chat with you guys.
Works for us, that's for sure.
Appreciate it, man. So, what do you think about raid balance and tuning of late?
We're just jumping right in, aren't we?
Yeah, basically.
Well, I mean,
Well-
it's your time, it's your air. If there's something else, I mean, feel free.
No, that's fine. That's kind of the reason. I just listened to Tuesday's show today. So, what you said was fresh in my mind, and I've listened to the introduction that you guys had for tonight's show. I gotta say, for the first time maybe ever, I feel like they were too hard. And I hate to say that because I don't want them to be a cakewalk either, but we're a heroic-only team, and we have a lot of former Mythic Raiders on our team who just are done with the grind. They don't want to do it anymore, but they still want to raid. They still want to clear the content and do it on farm. And it feels like this tier, and even with last tier, we did what we needed to do, and by the time we killed the final boss, everybody was just sick of the raid. Nobody wanted to keep going. Like, we killed Jailer once, and then in order to get the Jailer again for the people who missed that first time, we went in again, didn't have any luck with the larger group. We had a smaller group the first time we killed it because people were away that week. Didn't have any luck with the larger group, and for the first time ever for our raid team, we sat people. Right. And that doesn't feel good. I'm not the raid leader of my team. I'm the GM of our guild, and I call myself the raid facilitator. I do the calendar stuff and invite people to the raid team and do all that kind of stuff. And like in that role, like, I hate having to sit people, and I know it wasn't easy for our raid leaders either, but at that point we were like, we just got to get this done. People are making the same mistakes over and over again, and they're the mistakes that unfortunately kill everybody when they make them. And there's just, I agree with you, Jason, so much when you say like more needs to be done to even heroic, because I feel like they're very just difficult, and the mechanics are something where if you have somebody that makes that mistake, and even if it's somebody that's different every time you do a pull, you're done. You're toast. There's no coming back from it. You can't recover. Whereas I feel like older raids, things we've done before, like if there was a major mistake, you could at least recover from one of those. And now I feel like you can't recover from any of them.
Yeah, are you in my guild? Because this your story sounds so familiar to my experience.
Well, yeah, when you talk on the show every week, like your situations are very, very much akin to the same situations my guild goes through.
Yeah, I had to, I was pretty aggressively sitting people and trying to operate with smaller groups, on a weekly basis. When we get up to Prague, if it just wasn't going anywhere, I'd ask, a couple low performing people and a couple, problem children who have issues with mechanics to step out, and so I could balance the rate out and try again and try to stay on Prague schedule. And some people really didn't like that because they're like, well, it's not like a hard and fast rule that we need to kill a new boss every week. And it's like, well, it's not, but it is my goal. And I want to respect the time of the group entire, right? And if certain people, if I perceive that they're impacting our chances at a prog kill, then we're going to take some pulls without it. I mean, you also bring up a point that I really didn't mention in my whole spiel at the top, which is that I feel like Sepulchre in particular is a raid that really does not manage the flex group size scaling well at all. Very small groups are punished. Very large groups are punished. If you are somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 players, you're doing it correctly. And if you're doing anything else, you're punished for it. And at that point, it's like, why even have flex? Why does my 10-player group get 3 Grim Reflections on Anduin when half the group then has to go downstairs? It's just a logistical problem that you can't solve. So, I don't know. I had some feelings, early on this tier that were like, it's not worth trying to play with 25, 28, 30 people. I need to just cut the group down anyway because we're getting unnecessarily punished for running with this many people. And, this is the first tier in 11 years that I've been with this group and 10 years that I've been running it where it's like, should we just go on a summer break? Should we take a hiatus until season 4 starts? Because I don't know. Do people really want to show up and re-clear this stuff on a week-to-week basis? And I mean, even in the depths of 14 months of Siege of Orgrimmar or Hellfire Citadel, like, we kept it going. We had people there and we were trying to do stuff to keep it fresh, but nobody was like, well, I mean, obviously some people rotate out when you can flex, but people weren't like, as a whole, like, yeah, let's shut this down for the season. But, we're kind of looking at that as an option now when that has never happened before.
I really don't know, like, what our season 4 is going to look like, whether we're actually going to rate it, whether we're not going to rate it. I think there's going to be enough interest to have some of the team go, but I can almost guarantee we're not going to have our entire team show up for that. And, I can't blame them. I'm ready for something new. And I know most of the people on our team are ready for something new, but, a lot of them, they want that slime kitty too. And that's a nice pool, but it's not enough of a pool for everybody, especially when they've done all this content before. And I don't know enough about what's going to happen. Like, are they going to make it fresh? Is it going to just be the same thing? Like you guys said on the show this week, which version of those bosses are we going to get? Are you just going to be able to go in and steamroll everything, or is it going to be harder? Like, there's a lot of what ifs right now, and I just don't know. I'm not that excited.
Yeah, I can tell you at this point, we do not know which version of those bosses we are going to be seeing. There has not been information passed on anywhere that we can see that states what version of those bosses we're getting. As far as difficulty goes, or how the revamping is going to work, or how the scaling is going to work with group size, or like, but there's no information about that stuff. And we know that we're only probably a few weeks out from that happening. So everyone's kind of curious as to like what's going to happen and what's this going to look like. Because I certainly know a lot of raid teams are facing the same or asking the same questions that you are, which is this something we want to put effort into? Is this another Unot tier, if you will, right? Of let's just have everyone take a break. We'll get our mounts and stuff that we want to get for the group. We'll just focus on that thing. We'll just ignore this whole season 4 thing is happening. There's no Hall of Fame for it as far as the mythic stuff goes. So there's no like super special prestige thing that's attached to it. You can go into achievements. There's gonna be achievement stuff, but otherwise, like it's not something that needs to be competitive. And I don't think it's something that's designed to be. It's designed to be an experiment. So I would not be surprised if there were many, many, many raid teams who did not seriously raid during season 4. They just did the occasional thing, maybe half their normal schedule, whatever it is, picking a raid tier that they wanted to do. And if Blizzard makes those raid bosses actually challenging, like each of these raids is, a couple weeks of prog to get through kind of idea to relearn how to do the bosses and how to do the bosses with the different affixes that they're going to be applying to them. I think that there's going to be a lot of people who just are like, I'm not even interested in this, just totally disengage in that entirely. So yeah, it's something where I'm glad they're doing something rather than nothing, because I'd rather them use this extra time as an experiment than them just not do anything during this window of time. But I also don't know how much people are going to engage in the new content sort of stuff that they're releasing, the revamp that they're releasing.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like, I would rather see them do something instead of nothing. But in the end, it's, to me, it's that same thing again. And, after you run these raids so many times, it just, we're a team that we accomplish our goals, we farm what we need to farm, and then we like to take breaks, play other games, do other things in WoW. But not have to worry about rating on that schedule every week. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know what it's gonna bring for us. We'll probably be talking about that here in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I really hope with the the lack of a competitive element or whatever you want to call it, bragging rights, prestige element for season 4, that they just go a bit easier on the tuning. I mean, it will help that people who have rated all expansion have familiarity with the fights, even if we don't remember them because it's been a while since we did it. It's got to be way easier to pick them back up and put the bosses down than to learn them initially. So that should help. And I mean, keep in mind that they're doing some really cool stuff with loot in season 4. So that might be a big motivator, like you just get in there and kill some bosses, and inside of a few weeks, like, you're going to have the 3 most important items that you want at max item level or whatever. Like, that's awesome. And then being able to get stuff and upgrade it from one raid difficulty, item level to another potentially, or straight from like a normal to a mythic item, is going to be incredible. I think it's going to feel really good. And that might be, I mean, obviously, I think, if people want to, step out or whatever until Dragonflight, like, I don't, that's not necessarily a bad thing, although, like, it's good to do what you need to do for yourself, right? But I think the problem is when you remove yourself from a group with social stakes or whatever, you just expect everybody else to keep it going for you and welcome you back to the situation that you're expecting to have when you decide it's time to return. That can be a little bit dicey. That can create bad feelings among people who are keeping the group going in your absence, So you got to watch it with stuff like that. But, if it's a group decision that either like it's okay to do that or you're taking a break or whatever, fine. And obviously, I mean, I think season 4 is probably going to be less attended and less attractive to most players than seasons with new content. But for people that are sticking it out, I think it's going to be really rewarding. So I hope the tuning is favorable. I mean, without any of these traditional like structures in place that sort of gate tuning, or these like milestones for how something's supposed to be tuned, all of LFR is going to be open the first week of the season and everything like that. Even, I hope that they make it accessible and that, the bosses are fun, but it's not like cutting edge level progression. I don't even mean like the achievement. I just mean like, the groups that are getting like high world rankings for, new boss kills or whatever. I don't think that really does anybody any good. It doesn't serve any purpose to make it that way. So I hope they just keep it fun, keep it kind of wacky. That's really what I'm looking for. And I do think being able to target the gear is really going to help. I haven't I guess we don't know for sure what's going to be on these vendors when this stuff goes live, but man, if you could target that weapon or that trinket or something, and then you just have it, and you have it at a really strong item level, and you don't have to think about it, and you don't have to farm this boss for 15 weeks and hold your breath, and then you don't get the item. Like, it's going to be, I think it's going to be really big for players, because the stuff is build-arounds, man. You need that weapon, you need that trinket. Otherwise, your spec doesn't live up to its potential. So being able to go get it will hopefully be appealing enough to keep the season fun for, people that are trying to keep groups going.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that this will be something that at least breathes life back into the game for a lot of players for a period of time. I just feel like that if you're someone who wants to take a break and that's what you want to do at this time, there is absolutely nothing wrong with that at all. It's just, the people who do want to keep going will be able to like kill the world boss during the week that the raid is out, which means that the buffed raid is out, which means you're able to then get world boss loot at a higher item level, and you can get all the other fun loot at higher item levels. And if you're someone who wants to PvP a lot or do Mythic Plus a lot, then that's a way for you to get even more rewards from those activities. So it's kind of cool that they did something with this time. But do you have a question for us, Stoke? Is there a question that you wanted to toss in there for us?
Well, I just thought of something else while Jason was talking about loot. And, the interesting loot brings, it's definitely something that piques my interest, because I don't know, for the last couple of raids, I feel like the loot on the final boss has been just less than stellar. And especially here with the jailer, like it took us so long to get to him, to get through him. Like by the time we got there, most of us were geared, relatively well through Mythic Plus. And, he dropped an interesting trinket, I think, but as a Warlock player, I'm sitting with a 272 Changeling and a 272 Quantum device. Like that's not even something that I'm interested in. And it's just like, you spend all that time trying to get him down and then don't even really care about the loot. And I know I may be in a minority there, but it's just like, there's just no piece of loot there. Sylvanas had her bow for the hunters, but like there's just no piece of loot there that's like, man, I can't wait to kill the jailer and then get him on farm so we can get this piece of loot.
Yeah, I mean, there's the strength two-hander, which is pretty big, but yeah, that's 3 specs tops maybe, right? Like I hear what you're saying. I think they made a big mistake with jailer itemization, because they should have put one of two things or both on jailer, which have worked really well for other end bosses in the past, especially ones that were like the literal last boss of an expansion, a boss that was going to have a really long life cycle, a token of tokens, right? Which like Garrosh had, where he would drop a thing that you could turn into any token slot that you wanted, which was amazing if you needed to fill in a spot, right? That would have changed the conversation and the calculus that a lot of teams were doing early on about their progression path through heroic and into mythic and what have you. Or like we saw with, I think the first boss they really did this with was probably at the end of Warlords, where you had it was the ring, right? And you would get an item that would upgrade your ring a little bit every week. And then also they did it at the end of Legion, where you had the trinkets that would upgrade or whatever it was. It's been long enough that I can't really remember the specific items, but it was this thing where it's like, come back next week and you get a little bit more power in this effect, and everybody in your raid gets it, and you get that much stronger, and then you do it again, and then you get a little bit stronger, and then you come back next week and everybody gets another +3 ranks on this thing or whatever. That to me is good design for somebody who runs a team and wants weekly attendance and wants people to feel compelled and interested to come back, and also feel like they got rewarded for putting the time in, right? Like they showed up this week and something cool happened. I think they got something to show for it. Like those are good design pillars to have for these final bosses, and they've been missing lately. And I think they're really glaringly absent on Jailer.
Yeah, the thing I would have liked to have seen on Jailer was a weapon that was like Benediction / Anathema back in the day, that when you right-clicked on it, it changed into being another weapon, and you could keep doing that. And that weapon was a prismatic weapon for every class in any slot. And basically, it was a weapon. So your raid team every week would get 2 of them, right? That you could distribute out to your raid. And you'd want to kill it every week until everyone got 2 of them. Because for, your druid, it could be a healing staff. It could be a pole arm. It could be like you could just keep right-clicking on it and it would change into a different type of weapon for whatever your class or spec was. And you essentially would have everyone get it. You have this creation catalyst. You have this entire universe where everything's made and being created. Why not introduce a really interesting item like that is a reward that everyone wants as this amazing, cool reward that's this, prismatic weapon? I think that's a missed opportunity for something like that, because it would be a piece of loot that everyone would want. It'd be the highest item level you could get, and you could put really cool effects on it. You could really, blow the doors off, because it's a piece of loot that it comes off the last boss. So why would you not do that, right? It's the last boss of the expansion. Just blow the doors off of the loot budget. So, yeah.
Right, yeah. I agree very much with what you guys said there. Like, I hope in Dragonflight they will go back to, making those final bosses very interesting with their loot. And it kind of leads me into one last thing if we have the time for it.
Sure. Yeah, of course.
I know you guys don't like talking about conspiracy theories, and I don't like it either. But just hearing you guys talk on the show the other day got me thinking, and this is something that's been bantered back and forth with my raid team, basically the entire expansion. But does it feel to you like they're trying to do things that just make it take longer to do things, whether it's clearing a raid or doing world quests or getting your covenants done, just to keep people playing longer and to keep people subbed to the game longer?
Okay. I mean, that's an interesting question, because as you said, tinfoil hat. So like I could go either way kind of thing, right? Because there's no proof leaning one way or the other. I personally feel like they are designing more complex systems because they have a more diverse development team, with newer people with interesting ideas. And from what we've been told by developers of what their process is like, you have hundreds of developers, and someone comes up with a really cool idea. And let's say their really cool idea is conduits. And they're like, I have this idea for this thing that's like glyphs that you can apply, and it's like a talent tree. It's sort of like, the Titan progression that people were initially looking for, that kind of system of gaining power and changing abilities and making them stronger. And they're like, okay, how can we fit this into the game? And they're like, okay, well, at the same time as that, you have someone else arriving and going, I have this idea, and it's covenants, and we want to do covenants for this thing. And you're like, okay. So now we have 2 systems. Oh, and we want to have legendaries, so that's another system. We want to have, and you end up in this situation where they're like, how can we take all of these ideas that we think are pretty cool and kind of mash them together into a ball that makes it a, expansion? Like it all sort of works together in expansion. And I think when you have a lot of good ideas and a lot of ideas coming in that way, it's easy to overcomplicate things and to make things tie together that don't make sense to tie together. And in doing so, you make things take longer to do. So Torghast is another great example of, well, Torghast is this really cool instance, but then they tied getting the stuff you need to make your legendaries to running Torghast, and suddenly became a chore immediately at the moment they did that. But they wanted a reason for Torghast to be in there, and so they created a reason, and something that could be just a fun activity that you could do whenever you wanted has now suddenly became something that you feel you have to do regularly, and that is part of a grind to make legendaries, which then felt like an even more, sort of extensive process for players to get involved in accomplishing and making. So I think to a certain degree, there's that element of they are taking too many ideas and trying to make them all work inside one expansion, especially with Shadowlands. And I think on the other side of that coin, what you're talking about with making players play longer, I think they want more RPG aspect in the game for this expansion. They wanted this expansion really to have a narrative where you chose your covenant, you committed to your covenant. It was very RPG based. And with your standard RPGs, you have to really grind to be able to earn and accomplish something. And so I think their baseline that they put into this expansion for like earning and achieving things was just too high. Like like just across the board. How to earn reputations it was too hard to earn reputations. It was too hard to earn crafting materials. It was too many crafting materials you needed to make something. It was like everything was just harder, is what they tried to do with this expansion. And I honestly believe a lot of that influence was pulled from Classic. Classic was that thing of, hey, oh, you want to make your special crazy armor that you need armor smithing as a particular profession to make? Well, good luck going out and farming for 80 hours to get all of the materials you need to be able to make that one piece of armor, right? And that's where I think they came at a lot of the systems in this expansion. I feel less like the developers are trying to create ways to make uninteresting things take longer to accomplish so that players have to be online longer. And in general, as a goal, I think their goal is always they want a system to be, fun and interesting. I don't think they recognize or see the big picture all the time, how this fun and interesting thing they have, Torghast being that great example, could get twisted or warped when it's applied to everyone else's ideas in that big, sort of cooking pot, melting pot of an expansion. Where like, I have this great, cool idea and it's sort of dropped into this melting pot and suddenly these other things are attached onto it. And what it comes out as is, well, it's still a cool idea and fun, but now there's all these strings attached that you don't really want attached to it. And when you pull on one of those strings, this whole other system comes with it that also is not great and fun to deal with. So I think that's how we end up that way. I honestly, from a business perspective, if we look at it that way, they want people to sub and never log in. That's what they want, because the more people that are online, the more server instability they have. And so why would they want that, right? Like at an expansion launch, you want to sell tens of millions of dollars of copies of World of Warcraft and have very few people sign in is what you'd want, right? Because it's a subscription-based game. So it's not like people are forking over money every time they log into the game. They're handing over money every month anyways. So if someone only logs in for 10 hours a month, that's their preferred clientele versus the person who logs in 120 hours a month, because the person who logs in 120 hours a month is the person who's going to be essentially getting more value, if you will, out of their sub. And they would much rather not have server instability and have to, make larger and larger servers and have more and more population in the game if they can avoid it. So it's a tricky thing of, I think the developers want the game to be fun and interesting. And I think business perspective would be they want players to continue to sub, so have a reason to stay sub for 6 months, but not really log in every single day and play the crap out of the game, because it's something that creates more back-end problems for them there. What do you think, Jason?
Yeah, I don't know. It's weird because, like, in some ways, players are always going to, some players are always going to bristle against time gating. I think time gating can be valuable in some ways. Like when you have a season roll and you have a Valor cap for a few weeks, so that, players who have more time to play can't get way ahead of the pack in terms of overall power, right? Obviously, they're going to have more options and more power, but their ceiling is going to be about the same as everybody else's. I think they're too loath to do things like, remove those caps. I think the Valor cap in Season 3 took way too long to go away. Yeah. But I understand why you have it at the outset of new stuff. I do think there's some stuff in Shadowlands that feels like it was really implemented to keep you on the hook. Like Torghast being a weekly gate for legendary crafting. It was just a horrendous decision that ruined the Torghast experience. It ruined any potential Torghast had, and it made legendary crafting feel like garbage. And there was no upshot. There was no good element of this. I did keep everybody in the same, in the same power realm, because everybody had the same amount of weeks to do Torghast. But I feel like there was maybe some other way to tie all this stuff together. Shadowlands is a really weird case, because my thing about it in 9.0 and when it was really fresh was that there wasn't enough to do. I wasn't doing, AP. I didn't have this like gradual post max level progression path for my character. I would log in and I would round up anima, but like why? And I don't know. I didn't know why. Like I didn't really want any of the cosmetics, but I figured I would buy them because it's the thing they put in front of me, you know? Meanwhile, I saw a lot of other players complaining about how grinding anima felt so terrible and they never had enough anima to do things. And I couldn't figure that out because I felt like the stuff I was allowed to do with my anima and my souls, I would be taken care of just by doing, you know, weekly reset stuff. And then I was hungry for other stuff to do in the game outside of raids and dungeons, like just the kind of solo play that over Legion and BFA I enjoyed so much, or, you know, small group, whatever, outdoor world kind of stuff, felt really lacking at the outset of this expansion. And I feel like that, you know, I feel like there are elements of the game that absolutely support, like, somebody somewhere is making a decision that's trying to keep you on the hook, whether or not you're having fun. And then there's stuff that is a total 180 from that, where it's like, they're not even influencing me to log in today because I don't want to do any of the stuff that's on the menu. So I don't know. That's a tough one. I mean, it's hard to, like, obviously it's a business, right? And it's a consumer product and they need to make money off of it. You know, I'm sure any designer on the team that you talk to would say that making a compelling experience is the best way to have success in the market. But, you know, we'll never know who decides certain things about the way the game is marketed, sold, you know, paid for, etc. So I don't know. I mean, I think, I hope that they learn some lessons from Shadowlands. It seems like they have, because I feel like 9.2 was a lot better for that. You know, you had sort of compelling reasons to log in order to power up characters or, you know, do different stuff in the game. There was some silly time gating, but it was relatively low impact. It wasn't really tied to character power as much. I think of like the upgrade console in Fareem's Cave, whatever that's called. You know, that stuff was pretty heavily gated because you could only get so many ciphers to get the different things. And you had to wait, you know, I don't know, 5-day long upgrades or whatever. But it was just unlocking features in the zone that ultimately, like, don't really impact your play very much. Whereas, you know, your power was kind of ramping up as you went through and as you were unlocking more stuff in the zone from doing different quests and stuff. You know, obviously the campaign was time gated, but that was sort of for players to have a communal experience. And then once it was all out, you know, anybody then stepping in or any new character would just play through the whole thing and get all that stuff all at once. You know, I think that stuff is okay. I think that if Zereth Mortis is the model for endgame outdoor zones in Dragonflight, then I think we're moving in a good direction. It's a good mix of, like, there's enough stuff to do that's interesting enough, that feels rewarding enough, without it feeling like, if I don't do this on every character I'm interested in playing every day for at least half an hour for 9 months, I'm never going to be able to be where I want to be in this game. You know, like, that's...
If I can piggyback on that, I just want to say that the other thing that Zereth Mortis did that I really enjoyed was they put in elements of quest completion in that game that contribute towards each other. It always feels good to have an overarching goal that all the little things you're doing are contributing towards. Having that, you know, patterns within patterns quest, which honestly I think would be cool if they had a more substantial reward, or it was repeatable in the sense that, like, you could technically do patterns within patterns multiple times throughout the week if you wanted to, but you only got that main cache once, and all the other times you got other, like, Valor or something else that was a nice repeatable reward. You got, you know, like 600 Valor or something the second time you completed it, and 600 Conquest for completing it that next time. If you did it with War Mode on, you got Conquest or something like that. That to me would be really interesting, because I like going around doing world quests. What makes going around doing world quests and doing those activities inside the zone even more fun is knowing every time I do it, I'm also working towards this bigger goal and this other reward. That feels really good. So yeah, I like that. If they keep a sort of, here's your weekly reward, or here's a reward that contributes towards another reward. Like, you know, we always talk about doing a new deal and doing a new deal, then contributing towards patterns within patterns. Like, I love that compounding rewards. Like, that's always a cool thing to be like, not only am I, you know, I'm able to, it's almost like I'm able to min-max my rewards for outdoor stuff to a certain degree. And it's like, when you figure that out, you're like, oh, this feels really good to do on a regular basis. versus just being like, yeah, well, there's 8 role quests up. I might as well go do those 8 role quests. And, 3 of those contribute towards one calling. And that calling's a daily calling. And sometimes it's not something you want to do, like killing rares inside the maw. And you're like, it's not really helping me with what I want to do, right? Like, yeah, I think giving more player agency in the sense of, for callings, for example, them not being random like that, you being able to go to an emissary and say, I want to help you today. And them going, okay, here's a calling quest. And that is the quest that you can only do one of those a day. And here's the one that you can accept from this person. That to me would be a neater concept than going, here's a randomly generated calling that you can do. And every now and then it's one you just don't really want to contribute towards. I like having that meta aspect of doing questing and doing outdoor content. So if they can embrace that and bring that more into Dragonflight, that'd be really cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think the trap they kind of fell into the outside of Shadowlands, and we saw this in BFA too. And who knows? This might be highly motivated by the business side of developing the game. There's really no way for us on the outside to know, but they introduce these features that may or may not be cool or fun, but they make them feel required or feel intrinsic to the experience of playing the expansion. And I'm talking about stuff like Torghast, like Island Expeditions, right? If you remember the way Island Expeditions were positioned early on in BFA.
Oh, man.
And yeah, the overall kind of
the Azurite grind.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like these are traps they've fallen into lately where they put this feature in that is not really like a proven staple of gameplay, and then position it so that you either do it or suffer in terms of your character progression. That has not worked out well. Island Expeditions were not a success. Torghast was unfortunately not a success. They don't have any back of the box feature like that coming in Dragonflight. Like maybe there's some stuff we don't know about yet that hasn't been announced, but I think that's actually good. I think there's enough stuff to do in WoW between dungeons, a very robust dungeon system, a very broad rating system with 4 different difficulties, PvP, and outdoor world content. I don't think you need another pillar of WoW activity that's, a solo instance or a small group instance. That kind of stuff served a bit of a purpose in Mists of Pandaria with scenarios because it was a way for them to tell stories and basically, the whole place that dungeons took in our gameplay loop at that point in time was not stable, and they were trying to figure out what to do about it. And it was easier to build scenarios because they used so many existing assets and stuff. Okay, that I don't really want scenarios back, but they kind of served their purpose in that expansion. In more recent expansions, these features just haven't worked out. And, if they don't bring one in Dragonflight at all, I think that's probably good for a while. Let us play the game. Let us do traditional WoW activities and obtain character power via loot upgrades and see how that feels for a while. And if we need layers, then maybe we can add that on. But I think the player base is ready for that. The sentiment that I hear from people I play with and people that I hear from via the show, I don't think these layers upon layers of these little content offshoots and these other kind of inscrutable systems that give minor amounts of character power. I don't think this is what is making people log into the game. They just feel like time sinks or things that you have to do so that you can play the game you want to play. And I think they got to avoid those pitfalls going forward.
Yeah, all those are all very, very good points. And I think you guys pretty much covered just about everything that I could have thought of. And Spencer, I really hope it's, along the lines of what you said and not something more sinister. Because I really do think I know the devs want us to have fun and they want to make something good for us, but there's part of me that, maybe it's just everything that's gone on over the last year or so with Activision that just feels like there's something more sinister behind everything.
Well,
I hope I can shake that soon.
I hope so too. The one saving grace I'll give you too, along with this, is they removed Azurite power and that type of mechanic from this expansion for a reason. And it was because players didn't like feeling like they had to log in every day and do a loop to gain character power. They intentionally made a design choice to reduce the amount of time people had to spend online or felt like they needed to spend online to get character power. So just, as a grounding point, if you will, to the argument against that, the argument of they're making stuff harder so everyone has to be online all of the time doing things, they actually removed a system that was in place for multiple expansions from the game with the express purpose of allowing people to have more free time to do what they want to do and not have to log in all of the time.
Yeah, and I think as the player base of the game ages, I feel like just maybe my specific situation, like with kids and whatnot, my time to log in every single day gets less and less every single year that goes by.
Yep.
Well, and you sort of get into this thing of like, what exactly is the core of the WoW experience, and what are the rules, and how does it work, right? And I think they've done some interesting experiments over the last 6-7 years, and some of them have worked out, and some of them haven't. But I think maybe the pendulum swinging back to more core WoW is correct. I think that's what people are hungry for right now. We want a more streamlined experience. We want a narrower set of rules to play along with and goals to meet. And I think that's okay. I think it's preferable from the spot that we've been in the last few years. So I hope that's what we're getting. And what I would kind of like to see is them then add some more complexity to itemization without adding all these different layers onto gameplay, right? Make items more interesting, put some more stats in or something, and give us some different knobs to tweak. And I think they could go in a really cool direction with that versus just adding new activities that people don't like and adding, new systems that people have to put time into so that they can raid or so that they can PvP. I hope that they're walking away from the last, 5 years of this game with that in mind.
I would add to that of, it's not just about feeling like you need to do those things. It's adding a level of gating or complexity to players who want to actually play the game, understanding what those systems are and how they work. Shadowlands is one of the worst expansions we've ever seen for someone who's like, okay, I haven't played World of Warcraft either before or in many years. Let me see what this game is about. And you're trying to understand like covenants, conduits, legendaries, Torghast, farming materials from all these different places, like multiple endgame zones with Maw Souls and Zerath Mortis, like all these reputations. You had tier gear, you had like the shards from Domination, you had like all of these systems upon systems upon systems that existed, and a lot of them changed based off which covenant you went to, and like there was just like the complexity of it for a player trying to understand is something that also is a big problem. And I think returning to the roots of what World of Warcraft will help in the sense that it'll be easier for players who don't have as much time to commit to the game or even time to commit to resources outside of the game to play the game well. And by well, what I mean is play the game on that normal level / heroic raid level without feeling like they are completely screwing something up because they're the wrong covenant, or they have the wrong soulbind, or they aren't spec'd properly with conduits, or they don't have the right legendary on, or they aren't like, oh my goodness, all of the things that contribute towards quote unquote playing the game well and being able to accomplish the goals you want to accomplish, right? Which, by the way, 0 resources in game for actually understanding what is the quote unquote correct choice or better choice for your class, right? 0 way of telling. There's no meter in game that goes, if you take this talent, your DPS goes up by this amount. Like, there's nothing in game that tells you that, right? You actually have to go and beat on a target dummy and log it, and then go to an outside of the game resource and actually check on something, or use an add-on to check on something to see if that increased your damage or not. Having tooltips in the game that are like, if you choose this talent, it's better for healing larger groups. It's like that in general would be a helpful thing to put in front of players, right? But it's not something they do in the game. So the more complex they make things, the harder they create a wall for players who actually can participate in those activities. And so I would rather see them cut a lot of that bulk out of the systems and go back to a more baseline thing where even like putting, haste on gear and having haste be something that has a help tooltip you can turn on and off that tells you what haste does. Because I bet there's a lot of people out there who don't know that haste makes your dots and hots tick faster. I bet a lot of people don't, right? They put on more haste and they realize that they can swing and press their abilities faster, and that's really fun. But do they know that it also makes your bleeds tick faster? Probably not. Like, things like that actually help a lot more when they are attached to an item, right? When you mouse over haste on an item and it actually tells you what haste does and tells you what mastery does when you mouse over it, that's easier than going, what does mastery do? Well, let's open up my character page and mouse over mastery. And well, it's kind of obscure there because it just says that it uses the mastery affects this particular thing in my talent book. Okay, let's open up my talent book, find that thing in my talent book. Okay, this is what that thing actually does. So I know that there's a certain level of World of Warcraft that's very archaic in its design, in the sense that it was designed a long time ago, but I think it could really use with some heavy UI revamps for and I say accessibility, but really what I mean is just for forward-facing information to players as to decisions and choices they're making when they're picking stuff up. I would be, a cool poll if I could run a poll on every single World of Warcraft player is how many people who are playing an intellect-based spec are wearing agility gear and strength gear? How many people who are playing a strength or agility-based spec are wearing intellect gear? Because I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who are like, hey, I got these pants that are higher item level, I put them on, and don't realize, hey, these are agility pants. Oops. Right? Like that was a thing back in the day. Or, hey, I just got this new pole arm. This is a great, cool pole arm. It's an agility pole arm. And they're using it for healing. And it's affecting their healing ability. I'm sure that's happening. It happened all throughout World of Warcraft. It happened 2 expansions ago. It's happened when I first started playing. I wasn't even using an offhand. I didn't even know you could use a sword and an offhand at the same time. I didn't know that existed. Like, there's nothing that tells you that. And that still doesn't exist in the game. So I do feel like there's some work could be done that would make the game easier for players to understand and to play effectively. And I think that removing some systems just moves us in that direction.
Well, thanks, guys. I appreciate this conversation tonight. It was great.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming in.
Yeah. So thanks for checking in, man. Appreciate you.
Always appreciate you supporting the show. So thank you very much.
Yep, you guys keep it up. No matter how many times I get in the WoW doldrums, sometimes, listen to you guys every Tuesday or so, always reinvigorates me. So you're doing it right.
Thanks, man.
Here, man. Thank you.
Have a good evening.
You too. Good night.
Night. Oh, Jason, I wanted to ask you a curious question. All right, this is one of those, like, again, if I could run a Blizzard poll. Do you think there were more people participating in the archaeology system in World of Warcraft than there were mythic raiders in World of Warcraft?
Oh, God.
Uh-huh.
I mean, probably when it first came out, yeah, because Cataclysm was like the high point of reported sub numbers, right?
Yeah.
So archaeology came out at the start of Cata, which is when the most concurrent subs ever that we know of existed. And even though archaeology is certainly not everyone's cup of tea, I'll bet you most people checked it out, who were playing at the time because the game pointed them towards it and they went, oh, what's this? Let me see it. And then they did it for 5 minutes and went, I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, some people do it, like, some people like it.
They want all the mounts and pets and transmog and everything that goes with it.
It's not uncool. It's just not a system that's really been supported. I don't think very much over the years.
In Warlords, you could even fill up a museum inside of your garrison with different fossils and stuff.
Yeah, and Legion had stuff too in the archaeology shop in Dalaran. They've done some cool stuff with it, but it's certainly not everybody's cup of tea, and it's also not mega user friendly. But it's way more accessible than a mythic raid. So I don't know. That's a tough. I think overall, lifetime archaeology has to have more participants than mythic raiding. Yes.
The reason why I asked this question, and this is one of those interesting things that I sort of like bringing up around people wearing blinders about the content they do. Shadowlands doesn't have archaeology. It has an NPC in the game that actually tells you that you aren't able to gather relics, and archaeology isn't a thing during Shadowlands, right? I honestly, understand why they wouldn't spend the time developing archaeology stuff for all of Shadowlands for you to be able to fly around and collect. I understand them not choosing to put development time that way. But if it were true that more players participated in archaeology or were participating in archaeology than mythic raiding, wouldn't mythic raiding be the logical thing to not continue on in Shadowlands?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I mean, that's a tough call. I mean, it's a tough call because
it's a tough call, man. That's
like you do, and I've said that, I've said this on the show many times in many different contexts, but you do need that like aspirational content in WoW.
Agreed.
Right?
Agreed.
Like once upon a time, that was just straight up raiding, and you saw somebody in a full tier set in Shatrath or something, and you were like, whoa, that guy's decked out. I want to do that. I want to be like that. It's not really like that anymore, but you have these other things. You have this stratification, right? Because you have 4 different raid difficulties. And so you see somebody with the OTC mount and you're like, I want to do that. Or you see somebody with the mythic, end boss mount and you're like, I want to do that. So like it still exists to some degree. And I think you do want to have stuff that's specifically for like that very dedicated, high skill part of the player base, just with the recognition that it's niche, right? And like it's not for everybody. I think, you need different. It's a broad game. You need different features to serve different audiences. Something like archaeology is a way to have like cool story and interesting, non-power rewards sprinkled throughout various parts of content. Everybody can do it if they want to, but you're not really missing out on anything mission critical to playing the game if you don't do it. I don't know how many people really engage with it or anything, but on the other end of the spectrum, you need that really, high level, challenging, aspirational kind of content. The question is, if you're creating very broad and accessible content that nobody accesses, like what is the point of that? And if you have too much content that too many people can only aspire to, then what is the point of that content either, right? Like you got to find middle ground with these types of things.
Yeah, so I agree with you entirely, and I'm not someone who's for removing mythic rating from the game, but it's a question that I think is very poignant with this expansion, because we are in an expansion where they removed archaeology and chose not to participate. Like remove that activity completely from the game. That's been around for many expansions now, and
longer than Mythic Rating has.
Longer than Mythic Rating has. They chose not to actually continue doing that activity, and your assumption would be, oh, well, that must be something that not a lot of people were interested in, right? But no, I think Mythic Rating is something that I agree with you is aspirational. It's something that encourages players to push themselves, but this also speaks to the topic of, archaeology, something that was very accessible to every player and everyone could participate in that activity, is something that they did not continue forward and put development time into this expansion, whereas Mythic Rating, they did. And you're like, okay, so shouldn't Mythic Rating then be more accessible than it currently is? Because you would want to justify putting the development time and everything into that. And I don't think it needs to be. I think something can be aspirational and something you strive for without being something that only 1,000 people in the world who play the game are able to accomplish, right? And so that sort of leads us more into our next set of feedback that we get from our patrons here is the accessibility of Mythic Rating and where that should sort of land difficulty wise. But I wanted to frame that conversation a little bit because I think it's an interesting thing to keep in mind, right? Like I talked about this, and actually we had a very nice email that was written into us from a listener acknowledging that I talked about this on our episode, that there's a lot of people out there who have blinders and only see players who play the game adjacent to how they play the game. And they don't see the broader player base and who that broader player base is. And so just think about that with the archaeology thing and how many people actually do a mythic raid and actually mythic raid at all versus how many people are participating in that system that they had existed for many expansions and they just chose not to put effort into inside Shadowlands. Like that being an interesting note that happened there. Okay. So the first write-in comes from Desk Pop, which, by the way, I love that name. I think it's a great name. It says, evening, gents. To answer your question, I think that the raids in this expansion have been pointed to stumping, echo, and limit. I don't think they are always overtuned, but they are making way too many overlaps. One-shot and group wipe mechanics that 99% of guilds will struggle to find 20 people who can grasp them or have the ability to class stack to be able to get by them in a timely manner. I think Mythic needs to be more accessible, and that any good organized AOTC guild should be able to power their way through with nerfs and player power upgrades by the end of the season, even if you take the title away after Hall of Fame or whatever. So, okay, there's a few things to unpack in this, which I love. The first of which is something that I've thought about for a while, which is, why are we not removing the cutting edge title after 3 months if it's a 6-month tier? If you removed the cutting edge title because it's no longer cutting edge after 3 months, and you could just progressively nerf the content so that or buff character power so that everyone who wanted to actually progress through Mythic and do it could do so in a reasonable manner, meaning like, hey, the last boss by 5 months after it's being out might take you 70 or 80 pulls to figure out to kill. That would be a reasonable manner for that final boss on Mythic. Why isn't that a thing? If part of the complaint that comes in from a lot of these higher end Mythic teams is they don't want this to be everyone can earn the same things that we earn, why are we not making earning those things even more limited than they are? We already have Hall of Fame where there's Hall of Fame particular titles. Why not have the achievement for cutting edge be something that also goes away after a certain period of time? You can still earn the mounts throughout the entire time until the next season comes out. So you can still earn, if you're someone who wants to kill the last boss and get that jailer mount, you can still get that jailer mount for that full 6 months. But you cannot get the cutting edge title. If you want the cutting edge title, you have to kill the boss in the first 3 months. It's the cutting edge title. That's what cutting edge is. So I think that's interesting. I really like that idea of any AOTC guild, if they actually want to commit to doing Mythic, should be able to, within that six month frame, actually kill and clear all of Mythic if they can get 20 people together and get in there and do the content with all of the nerfs and player power upgrades that are coming through. I agree with you entirely on that one. I also agree that this tier was something that just held way too many white mechanics that were very high personal responsibility mechanics. Oftentimes, it was more than one on the same boss, where if you screwed up, if one person screwed up mechanic A, they wipe the whole raid. And if another person screwed up mechanic B, they wipe the whole raid. And if someone screwed up mechanic C, they'd wipe the whole raid. And that there was multiple bosses throughout this expansion that were designed that way, with 2 or 3 ways of wiping the whole raid. And I think that's not good design when it comes to a game that requires you to organize 20 people in Mythic content, outside of, as you mentioned, trying to stump Echo and Limit. If the goal was, hey, Team Liquid or Echo is a team that you want to challenge, I still am someone who is of the mindset that they should create a separate server that is a tournament realm that allows people to have access to all of the gear that they want to have access to off of vendors. And this tournament realm goes up 2 weeks before the raid launches. And these teams who want to compete and do a race to world first can log into the tournament realm. Anyone can log into the tournament realm, and they can go and raid the content without cinematics and without story points. They turn off the text, they turn off the cinematics. You can go in, you can raid the bosses and clear the raid and do the challenge of clearing the raid without split runs, without these BOE sales, without the all the other shenanigans that happens around these things. They can still go and do the runs, and it's publicity for the raid, because for the 2 weeks leading up to when the actual raid launches on live servers, you have all these eyes on people doing this content, and they can scale it up, and they can make it really challenging. They can do whatever they want with it and make it interesting for those teams to actually get in there and do that content. And the content that releases to everyone else is not that content, because that content can be tuned for those teams if that's what they want to do. And I think that, to me, would also be a much more attractive way of handling the situation, because tuning any raid or any content in any video game for less than 500 players, what are you doing? You're tuning it for 0.0001% of your player base? What are you doing? right? And that's what a lot of this stuff was, and what a lot of what this stuff comes down to. So I would be in favor of if they want to do anything for those teams, do something special like the tournament realm. Don't do that to live teams. It doesn't make sense to do. How about you, Jason? What do you feel about all this?
I mean, I think Blizzard needs to either like formally support the race in some way, which I would not prefer ultimately, but they need to make a decision one way or the other, right? They need to either ignore it and don't kind of tacitly approve of what the community does with it, and don't try to essentially be a participant in it by like releasing content that they don't expect to be killed at first glance, and then like gradually yet significantly nerfing fights in the first 2 weeks that racers are pushing it. Like they need to pick one. Either have official support for it via like a tournament realm or something where these splits and stuff are not impacting the live game. They're not impacting live server economies. They're not impacting Warcraft logs, for example, right? Like all of these trickle down effects that kind of happen when, it's race season and all, these teams with these big infrastructures are running splits, like it messes up the game for a lot of other players in like legitimately real ways.
Yep. Well, and Blizzard makes decisions around loot acquisition, how loot works, based off of trying to deny those situations.
They absolutely do. And, I think, like, I don't know if they would admit that, but, like, it's obvious that they do. And it's obvious that they not
trading tier gear thing? Like, come on. We all know what that was. Yeah,
like, who do you think that's impacting? Like, it impacts everybody, but why are they doing that? They don't, and the average raider, in my opinion, has been made to suffer over recent years because of this kind of tacit support of Race to World First and Blizzard acting essentially as like this spoiler who's trying to put these barriers in front of the racers. It's like, whatever, either host it on separate realms with a flask guitar and just get it over with, or ignore it, do what's right for the vast majority of players, including your rank and file mythic raiders, right? Not your top 0.001%, but your people who just want to prog mythic. Do right by those people. And if that means that Echo and Limit are done in a reset, okay. Like when Destiny puts a new raid out, it dies in a couple hours.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's been the way with that game since Destiny 1, since relatively early on in that game's life cycle. And Destiny's been around for years now. And when new stuff comes out, the race is literally a few hours long almost every time. And nobody goes, oh, well, this must be garbage because the best teams out there killed it in an afternoon. Like, it's just a different mindset. And, I going back to Xavius, of course, like I think that was a thing that they really have desperately tried to avoid. And I don't understand why. One thing that Desk points out here is one of the very real things about Mythic raiding that makes it inaccessible and makes it extremely challenging is the logistics of having a set, consistent 20-player roster, like 25-player team, give or take, with a bench. And, you have these consistent pieces that you can count on to work your way through. I have a big overall roster of people who are interested in raiding with me, but I can never get more than 2 or 3 mythic raid bosses killed by the time it's all said and done because we don't have strict attendance requirements. Our goal is not mythic prog, so we get as far as we can get until too many people drop off. There's a very real part of the mythic challenge is the logistics of maintaining the group. And like it cannot be denied. Like that is a high barrier for many, many teams to meet.
Yeah, and I would add that part of why people sort of trickle off is because they don't have an interest in spending 80 pulls pulling a boss, right? They don't have an interest in that. They don't want to spend their entire week dying to one boss without killing that boss. And that comes back to tuning.
The Ashvane effect, if you will.
Yeah.
And now, really, I really don't want this to sound like sour grapes. Like, I deserve to kill Mythic Jailer because I want to, and I really like WoW, and no, I don't care, and it's not my goal, and I'm not willing to put in the time or effort to make that happen. Like, I'm literally not. But I pay $15 a month to play the game, and everybody that I play with does that too. And I like playing the game, and I like the raids, and I would like it if, as time went on, that I could, have some other stuff to do.
Yeah.
And push a new boss down every once in a while because the logistics would line up and the tuning would line up and, everything like that. What has happened in previous points in time is like the team goes pretty steady until we hit like a difficult boss like an Ash Vein. And then once we kill that boss, then everybody's just done because everybody's so sort of emotionally drained from the experience.
Yeah.
Even though the next boss would take fewer pulls, nobody wants to do it.
Yeah.
So, I think there should be hard content, and I think there should be content that is only clearable by the best of the best. And I am not saying that I should get cutting edge and boss mounts because I pay money. Yeah. Not at all. And I don't believe that, and I don't want that or care about that. Like, that is not what I'm saying. But I do think, and now they have in fairness, they have nerfed Mythic Sepulcher quite consistently and quite substantially, like to a degree that I feel like is uncommon for modern raids. I just keep going back to the fact that the tuning needs to change over time because the players need to change over time. And when your super top end players are bored and your tryhards are still pushing, then the tuning needs to be different at that point. And you have server rankings, you have worldwide rankings, you have achievements, you have all these different things that prove like, okay, this team is better than this team, right? Or this team worked harder than this team because they killed it first and they killed it prior to these nerfs and they have this reward or whatever. Like, there are ways you can do this that reward the top end without punishing everybody else.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I would just like to see that philosophy kind of shift a little bit. I mean, I think Desk takes it a little too far about like a good organized AOTC guild being able to power through Mythic. Like, not all the way. I don't think so. I mean, I think it's a different level of logistics, mindset, everything. Like, AOTC is hard, but it's not. It doesn't require the same kind of precision that Mythic rating demands for most bosses. So, but I do think if you can get AOTC, you should be able to get like, halfway through the Mythic raid with a little bit of elbow grease, something like that. And if you're learning the right lessons from doing those bosses, then maybe that influences you to take it to that next level and to develop those mindsets and develop that precision. I think that could be a really good thing. I think, the logistics are tough and it's tough to keep like a set 20-man roster that's dialed in and it has all your bases covered and people are playing meta choices and playing them well, playing them comfortably. I think that is almost as significant as what happens inside the raids is having that team construction and that mindset like across the team. But getting in there, like, it's at a certain point, it's like there's stuff to do in the game and I want to do it, but I can't because I can't clear these barriers that everyone who cares about the barrier's existence has cleared, right? Like, if you have CE and you have server first or whatever, you have Hall of Fame, you probably don't care about who's coming in behind you, to fill up the rest of the ranks or whatever, because you staked your claim. And I just want stuff to do, I guess, is really what I'm saying, right? And I want to feel like that next boss could be approachable. It could be worth the group's time, right? If everything lined up and people wanted to do it. And I think sometimes, historically, the last few years, more often than not, it has not felt like that beyond the first one or two Mythic bosses. So I don't know. It's a tough call. Overall, I think that you need to have stuff that your bell curve players cannot do. Like, you need that high end difficulty to keep the game interesting and to make people want to get better and try to take on new challenges. And you do have, I mean, at this point, the game is so established, it's so mature, and the top end rating scene is what it is. like if you took that away or made that like drastically easier from Jump Street, that you would alienate those players because they would never find what they're looking for, right? But once they're through, man, let's drop in some nerfs. Let's encourage people to play. I don't think that a team coming through and killing a boss 4 months after another team killed it diminishes the first team's accomplishment on any level.
Yeah. I think it makes sense to have an AOTC team if they are willing to put in, 70 or 80 pulls on a mythic boss, 5 months after the raid came out to be able to kill that boss. That's how I feel. Now, I just don't think there's a lot of AOTC teams out there who are willing to put in the pulls to learn how to do a boss like that. But I do think the boss should be achievable by an AOTC team, meaning a team that is not the best Covenant with the best, spec, with the best gear, with the etc., to be able to actually have to go in there and kill a boss 5 months after the raid came out. I think you should be able to bring in, a class that is the bottom of the barrel of DPS, on Warcraft logs rankings, right? And actually have that person be able to have your raid team be able to produce enough damage to kill off those mythic bosses that late into a tier, provided they're willing to learn how to do the mechanics. To me, the loop, the hoop that you should be having to jump through after 4 months or three or 4 months after a mythic raids come out should all be mechanical. They shouldn't be, sorry, because you're playing XYZ, you can't accomplish killing this boss. I feel like it should be a mechanical requirement of, no, you really do have to be able to do blasphemy properly. If you actually can't do blasphemy, you will wipe the raid, right? Like that just is what it is. Yeah,
without the stacking 4 of the flavor of the month TPS spec or whatever.
Right,
yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, that's a pretty good way to think about it, I think. It also helps when they take a mechanic like blasphemy and take it from 8 seconds to 16
yeah. Yes. Okay. The next writing comes in from Zahar, who says, I'm going to echo Desk Pop, which is why I wanted to place this question where I did, on raid difficulty. While I missed Prague on Castle Nathria, did get a heroic carry just before 9.1 came out, so I got to experience the chaos of the final phase at least once. I feel this expansion has had the most back-to-back of punishing end bosses ever, and while Jailer is challenging, I don't think he's a fun boss. I think I'd rate KT as the boss that was the best at being both challenging and fun. Is heroic rating reachable for the dedicated player? In my opinion, most definitely, but these punishing mechanics have been too much. How many times have you heard, okay, everyone jump off the ledge and die this season? After 400 plus pulls on Jailer, a lot of times.
I haven't heard it any times, but it's because I'm the one saying it.
It's true. Just turn the echo on in your headphones. You'll hear yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I've said it way more times than I particularly would ever care to.
Right. Mythic reachability, I find Mythic Plus very attainable and have easily gotten my Keystone Master for both Season 2 and 3. I haven't pushed a 20 yet, but I'm hoping to get at least 1 plus 20 completed before the end of the season. As for Mythic rating, though, that's another story. Back when we found it easy to find 20 strong players back in Legion, we would regularly push the entry-level bosses, and we even went back to get a Mythic Xavius kill post-Cutting Edge, just because we could, and it was fun. But the downturn of subscribers in the past 2 expansions has hurt our Connected Realms, and thus our raid team, and we're lucky to get 16 to 18 raiders for our Heroic Prog team. So we don't have enough raiders to do current Mythic content, and zero interest in the super punishing Mythic bosses of the previous seasons. There has been only 1 guild in our Connected Realm that has even got a Mythic kill under their belt. That alone speaks volumes to me on its availability to the average raider. The other thing that doesn't help is if you're playing Alliance, is all the people swapping to Horde, because that's the other thing that happened in the Mythic scene is some astronomical number of my guesstimate would be like 70+% of the Mythic raiders in the game who were Alliance moved to Horde over the past 3 years. Like I think that just like an astronomical number of raiders moved from Alliance to Horde over the last few years.
It's hard to gauge like exact numbers, but man, that was like, it was like a slow trickle over the years. It turned into just an avalanche.
Like there would be a raid tier that would happen where I could count 5 or 6 Alliance raid teams who went Horde for the next tier. And then the next tier, it'd be another 5 or 6 raid teams. And like by raid teams, I mean like the entire raid team would go over. So like, okay, that's like 25 more people for each. So it's like 100 mythic raiders every tier that I knew would swap. And there's plenty of teams out there that I don't know. So, yeah, like it's...
Well, in Dragonflight, it's going to be all Horde teams, but they're all going to be dwarves and Dark Iron dwarves. So
yeah, it's going to be a little weird to see what happens with all of the cross faction stuff. For sure, especially with the limitation on you have to have guild kills, so you have to have so many people in the raid to have a guild kill. And so how many people can you have cross-faction, and who gets to be cross-faction will be the big conversation.
Cross-faction guilds, that's the big surprise, right? For 10.0, maybe. I don't know. That's going to be a mess. But I really feel like Zahar is holding up a mirror to a lot of my experiences here.
Right.
I assume that Zahar means Kel'Thuzad by KT as the boss that was best at being challenging and fun. I don't disagree with that. I think Kel'Thuzad was a great fight in Sanctum Domination, one of my favorite fights in recent memory, because the pacing felt so good. You know, it felt accessible because it taught you how to do it as you went through, and then just kept adding wrinkles and went, okay, but can you handle this? Well, can you handle this? Can you do this again but harder? Like that, it was fun to prog. I do think Jailer is fun, but you know, a tank and raid leader perspective is not necessarily the same experience as everybody else. But I like Jailer because it's super predictable, right? Everything happens in the same order. It's just like, deal with this, learn how to do this dance step, and then go to the next thing.
It's super predictable, provided you don't get bugs that are entirely unpredictable and wreck the entire fight for that pull.
Bugs are that's a whole other story.
There's after pulling the boss the amount of times we did, we got to see all of them, and so it was one of those. Oh, hey, well, really good 8-minute pull ruined because as he goes to do his mace slam, he spun 180 degrees as he swung and slammed in a place that he had not initially placed his mace.
The game has to play by the rules for anything to be fun.
Exactly.
That's for sure. Well, I guess unless the bug works out in your favor, but that, you know, they usually don't.
They fix those bugs immediately.
Right. Yeah, that's easy. But when the floor disappears, or the thing that one shot kills you doesn't show up on your screen, that can be a little bit harder. But I mean, Zahar definitely echoes my experience here. I think it's the volume of punishing mechanics. I think it's, if you have like a really just nasty, you know, nuke mechanic that's going to kill somebody if they don't do it right, fine. If you have like one of those per fight or whatever, and it helps too when you can control it. You can like bait somebody or like assign somebody.
The beam that tracks a person and they can place the beam outside of the raid. One of my like super easy one-shot mechanics where you're like, okay, this beam is going to target one player. That player has to get out of the raid and point it away from the raid. That is their only responsibility when this beam targets them.
Right.
That's the type of player agency I enjoy. Not something where it's like, hey, we're going to put a bomb in the raid that wipes your raid, and you have to carry that bomb through the entire fight. So essentially there's a player with a beam on them that's going to wipe the raid for the entire fight. That player is targeted by that beam.
Right.
Like, oh.
Yeah, I think like just being able to have counterplay against the stuff helps a lot, and being able to be like, okay, who are my like mechanically good players? Who can I assign to be in charge of this part of the fight? Like that always feels better than, oh, if you get targeted with this, then follow these 3 potentially very complicated steps in order to avoid wiping the raid. Like, you know, Sepulchre has leaned into stuff like that a little bit too much, and when you combine it with the tuning issues and the bug issues, especially early on, you know, it doesn't really feel great. And yeah, I mean, again, like Zahar mentions the logistical challenges of having a consistent roster for any kind of mythic rating, even just a cup of coffee, 1 or 2 bosses, like it's hard to do. And you know, we've talked on the show a lot over the years about the game not really supporting the guild system very well anymore, not funneling players into guilds, allowing people to get essentially like what they want, or to reach some level of satisfaction without having any kind of social stakes in the game, and how that hurts teams that are constantly trying to funnel people in to keep a roster going. So, I mean, Zahar could easily be talking about my experience. There is only one guild on my Connected Realm group that has mythic kills, and that's mine. It's like the barriers to access are high, and that's intentional, and that's okay. But the problem is a lot of the infrastructure around rating, in other words, like the game itself writ large, has not flexed with the realities of World of Warcraft in 2022. Right now, maybe if Dragonflight is super fun and it draws people in and they stick around, then maybe this stuff gets smoothed over a little bit. But recruiting for like a middling team is very difficult right now. If you're on a low pop realm, low pop server group, why do you want to ask people to spend money to come to it, right? Like that's sort of like an ethical conundrum. It's hard to keep. It's just hard to keep rosters together. What I'm really hoping is that we see huge rounds of connections, or we just get rid of the concept of like realms as we know them maybe shift dramatically somehow as a result of this, right? I would love to see more support for guilds as a concept, including cross-faction membership, and maybe more perks or more reasons to be in a guild, more like kind of rule breaking, so like you feel like you're breaking the rules because you're doing it with your guild or something. That kind of stuff could be good. Like maybe you could break loot trading rules or something. Yeah. I mean, all that kind of stuff would kind of add up. And I mean, this is, everybody's kind of talked about logistical challenges for keeping your team together tonight, and it's a real thing. I mean, like it always has been. It's not new, but it's harder now than it's ever been because there's just not a lot of players that are looking for this kind of stuff at the moment. It's going to get better for a while, but is Dragonflight going to keep it that way?
Right. Yeah. Well, the question that Zahar ends with is one we actually kind of answered to a certain degree earlier in the show, but I do want to include here, which is, what are your feelings on raiding in Season 4? Well, I like the concept of how they plan to hand out gear. Here we sit discussing how punishing these raids were. Do we really want to go back in there? Well, I mean, I personally am not thrilled and excited and, pumped to dive into Season 4. And part of that is the prog for this tier just sucked the life out of me when it came to how much I really wanted to spend time raiding in the game, because it went on for a month and a half longer than any of us expected it to go. Which is like, that's the truth. It literally was almost twice as long of a prog period as what I mentally had prepared myself for, difficulty wise with this tier. And that kills my enthusiasm about doing any of these raids again. Because I feel like I want a 3-month break. That's what it feels like I want. I want to not have to really engage with raiding very much for the next few months. And I don't feel like we're going to get that. I feel like Season 4 is going to be out the next few weeks, and then it'll be, okay, are we actually doing this? What's our team doing? I think there's still going to be a conversation as to how much our team engages in the content, whether we go, we're going to raid, but we're only going to raid a few nights a week. Like maybe we'll just raid 2 nights a week as opposed to raiding, more than that. And I think that might also be attractive. Like I think there's a lot of factors that go into whether or not I really want to go back into these raids. I like that you point out the loot stuff, because we've talked about that already, and I do think loot is going to be a better experience for players, and I'm glad they're doing this experiment. But yeah, I think the tuning of the bosses, how long it takes to reprog everything, and sort of for my team at least, I think there'll be a certain amount of wait and see if it's worth it, is what I think the big questions are going to be asking for a lot of people. Of, is it worth it to us to put the effort into re-clearing these raids again, versus just not, and just being like, all right, we're just going to clear Sepulchre every week to get everyone their mythic mounts, and that's what we're going to do, and we'll sell mythic mounts, and that's what we're going to do, and we'll sell mythic mounts on the weeks where it's not active, so we aren't dealing with an affix and increased gear or whatever. We don't care about that. We just want the mounts, and that'll be the interesting thing that our team does. I feel like that's the more likely option at the moment than, yes, let's start reprogging, Castle Nathria again, and let's try and reprog Sylvanas. Like, I don't think anyone wants to even touch that boss again. It's just the way it is, so Yeah,
Oh, don't say those two words back to back. Reprog Sylvanas.
Exactly,
It's a bad
right?
combo.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm with you mostly. Like I'm keeping my fingers crossed for face roll. Just make it face roll, man.
Sure.
The game will survive. We will get to Dragonflight. You can make this season a joke and just make it fun. Make stuff fall over and make the gear pop out, and then you get it at a high item level, and then you go to the vendor and you get the exact thing you want, and then it falls over even faster next time. Like, it's okay. We can do that. We could just get totally wacky with it because it's going to be a short season.
Yep.
There's no prestige on the line for this stuff. Make it streamlined and fun, and that's what I'm really hoping for. And if they do that, okay, then I'm cool with it. But if I'm beating my head against the wall trying to figure out the math on like how much DPS we need to hold on Denathrius before we get into phase 2,
Oh my god,
no, dude, like I don't really want to do that. I want to just go kill them and get loot. Like
we need these 4 DPS to stand still and not press any buttons for the first 30 seconds of this fight, please and thank you. Yeah, not
right. Yeah, like I don't want to end up there. So I'm hoping that they tune it favorably for players and just make it almost like a thank you for hanging in there, and make it like a victory lap where we just get to kind of live out our raiding dreams, right? Just like blast these bosses into oblivion and get like the best loot we could imagine.
I like the victory lap term. That's a good one. I like that.
Yeah, like I mean, that's really what I'm hoping for. And maybe we could cut some of these super long fights down somehow, like speed stuff up or just like reduce health pools to the point where maybe Sylvanas isn't a 12-minute fight.
Jane has figured out how to portal you past the intermissions. You go directly from phase 1 to the phase 3. Like, why not, right?
A 2-phase Sylvanas fight would be... Yeah, that would be a dream come true from season 2. It's I can't really answer Zahar's question simply because like it's part of the reason why I haven't been a big classic player, right? Because like I really don't want to relive these raids that I lived in years ago, as much as I like ZA or something, for example, like I don't really want to go back and have that be my or Karazhan. Like Karazhan's like, I mean, if you ask me like what are the best raids they've ever done, stuff like Karazhan and ZA, like the 10 mans at TBC will always have a special place in my heart. And I could go do them right now if I wanted to put a bunch of time into TBC and find teams and spend my time doing that. But like for me, raiding is it's a journey, right? It's not about any particular destination. I want to do the next thing. I want to move on to the next thing. And I'm okay with them doing this and doing something different and weird and giving it a shot. I like it. I like it conceptually because farming out, 12 months or whatever, I guess it wouldn't be quite that long, but 9 months of Sepulchre doesn't sound great. I mean, it's always kind of, you hit those doldrums really bad when in these final tiers that just last so long, right? So I'm okay with them mixing it up. And if it was Legion, I'd be like, yeah, let's go. Season 4. Let's go do Tomb of Sargeras again. Because I thought that raid was awesome. Let's go do Nighthold again. Dude, these are cool fights. Like, yeah, let's do it. Let's mix it up. And I mean, I guess the really sad thing is most of Nathria is really good. SLG is on Heroic is a little obnoxious, but it's not too bad. And Denathrius kind of stinks. Most of Sanctum is actually a really good raid, except for like Fate Scribe is annoying and Sylvanas just feels like garbage, or at least it did when we were doing it last.
Well, and Painsmith was substantially too punishing. Yeah.
Well, on Mythic, yeah. On Heroic, it wasn't too bad. Fate Scribe was the one that always felt like you were dying for no reason,
right.
Because like the rings wouldn't cooperate, or like one person didn't understand what they were supposed to be doing, and then you ran out of time.
There's more of those mechanics on Fate Scribe and Mythic too. It's like 2 more of those.
It's like Fate Scribe is just like, it's one of those fights. It's like such a cool concept, but just doesn't really work, in the context of the game. And then, most of the fights in Sepulchre, even though as much as we've been kind of complaining about it, because our reality right now is living in this raid. And I really don't think it's a bad raid in terms of design. I think the fights are I don't even hate Anduin as a fight. Like, I actually think it's a really cool fight design.
That is the boss of the expansion for me. I think Anduin's a very well designed fight.
It's funny because I wiped on it so much. It frustrates me so bad. It's been this roadblock for us so many times, even to reclear. But like, I can't hate it. I can't. Yeah. I think it's too well designed. It's just not tuned. It's not tuned where it needs to be. It's still not. They've nerfed Befouled Barrier by 68%, and it's still not tuned right.
And it is a mechanic that involves healers getting to shine. And there's so few fights out of there where your tanks get to shine, your healers get to shine, and your DPS get to shine. I think that's part of what Anduin delivers as an encounter. It's just a very strong encounter that lets everyone do something and have their moment, and that's very hard to do.
Yeah, like it's so well designed, and the tuning has just never quite gotten there. I mean, it's a lot better than it was, but man, it doesn't work. It doesn't scale with group size very well. It has so many problems in those regards, but it's like it's fixable. I feel like they could fix it, and they're just not. They're not taking that step at this point. So. I don't know. Again, like most of the fights in Sepulchre are fine. It's like you have these fights that I think they try to make them like epic, right? Is sort of the what they're shooting for, and it just ends up being obnoxious because there's too many layers. The fights are too long. There's too much stuff that too many people have to do right too consistently in order for you to even have a chance to win, and that wears on you after 6 months. So yeah, I think it's. I don't think there's anything unreasonable for any of us, you or I, or for Zahar here to be sitting here going, yeah, I don't know. I don't really want to do that.
Yeah.
So, this is why the play is just make it super face roll, tune it easy, let us access our super powerful stuff and optimize our builds and go nuts. It could be sort of like the very tail end of, say, Legion with our like exploding artifact power and Concordance was blowing up,
and a BFA with corruption,
and a BFA with corruption, with, 7 stacks of Twilight Dev just lasering stuff into oblivion. Like I like that feel. That's a fun time of the expansion. Usually it's about like 2 weeks long. So if we get like 4 months out of it or something, it could be cool if that's what the goal is. And they've been a bit cagey about it. I think they've dropped enough hints that that's my expectation, is that it's going to be kind of face rolly. But then again, they could also like want it to be face rolly, but then they don't deliver that until they get like 2 or 3 weeks worth of data, and then they have to retune it.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see. All right, last write-in comes from Shorel, who says, as a raid leader of a normal raid team with a lot of folks who are not highly skilled raiders and or expect to be able to gear through raiding, the difficulty curve has been really noticeable. I think it's pretty clear that Blizzard anticipates most raiders will supplement their gear with Mythic Plus. Having to kill more than one boss to get a vault reward doesn't help much with a low-time team that only does reclears every other week and has to stop reclearing when attendance on a recleared night starts to dip. Adding in the noticeable difficulty curve, we haven't been able to do anything but LFR heroes since last summer. And sadly, you can't do cross-faction LFR, so now that almost 10 of our folks have swapped over to Horde, we can't even LFR as a whole group. I know the cross-faction stuff is coming out in baby steps, but I wish they would implement an opt-in button on Group Finder activities. I think LFR in cross-faction should 100% be a thing. I even think the Battlegrounds, random Battleground stuff should also be a cross-faction thing. I think it's silly that they're holding off and doing baby steps on that. I'm with you with that entirely. I also, one of the things I really enjoy that Shorel brings up during this is the supplementing your gear with doing other things outside of raiding. I do think it is very clear, as you put it, that Blizzard expected players who are going to be doing raiding to be doing things outside of raiding that gets you gear that makes you then raid better. I don't think that's necessarily a negative until Blizzard starts designing the raid difficulty around the expectation that people are doing this on a weekly basis. And by that, I would say Mythic's probably the only place where you should 100% be doing that. as far as designing it around people who are wanting to do mythic content should be above XYZ gear item level, which means that most likely people who are going to be doing mythic in the first few weeks that mythic's out are doing activities outside of raiding to get their item level up to that point, right? Normal raiders, they should not be tuning a normal raid around expecting normal raiders to be going out and doing 15s. That's not an acceptable thing on any level. Even expecting them to be doing +3s on a weekly basis, doing 4 +3s so they get 2 options from their vault, not something I would expect normal raiders to be doing. I would expect normal raiders to be raiders who want to log in on a Friday night to have a good time with their friends, and that's could be the only night they log in that week, and they're showing up to do raid. And outside of that, they might log in every now and then and do some world quests or something like that, but nothing major outside of doing the raid content, which means that normal raid needs to be accessible to people who are heroic dungeon geared / people who have done, world questing to try and get rewards, maybe some reputation rewards, maybe some crafted gear, like that kind of item level is what you're sort of looking at. And if those activities don't equip you well enough to jump into a normal raid, then I think the normal raid is actually probably tuned too hard. And I'm not saying you should be able to clear a normal raid in that gear as someone who is not, very skilled at their class, as highly skilled is what the term Churl used. But it should be something where you can kill 3 or 4 bosses at an 11 boss raid. I don't think that's out of the question. And, hitting that 2 boss mark or that 4 boss mark to get vault rewards shouldn't be something that's out of reach for people who are at that sort of gear position. So I do feel like this is a good note for Blizzard to sort of look at when it comes to when they're doing their balancing for normal. If they're at all thinking, hey, you know what, your average normal raider is going to do 4 Mythic Pluses a week, I think that is way out of whack for what people are going to be doing. And I actually really like that your team does LFR together. I think that's a great activity. I've seen a lot of people do that with their raid team because they do want to get together on that evening and have a good time with a group of people. And LFR is a great way to do that. And it is unfortunate that the cross faction isn't there. But I think LFR is a great way to introduce people to mechanics for fights that then translates easier to normal. Because you can get everyone inside, a chat or Discord, whatever it is, and be able to communicate what boss mechanics are on LFR. And typically, those boss mechanics translate reasonably well to normal, right? They do a good job of being like, this mechanic that you need to avoid in LFR won't kill you in LFR, and it might kill you in normal, but you'll learn to avoid it, right? And that's the important thing. So I like that you do that. It's a great way to prep yourself for your normal raid and a great way to transition players that way. It's just unfortunate if they're like, yeah, your average normal raider should have normal level, eye level raid loot on them to clear normal. I don't think that's fair. I think your average normal raider should be able to be 10 or 15 item levels below the fully geared normal raider to be able to clear normal raid. I don't think it's reasonable from a time perspective. People who raid normal generally just don't have a lot of time to commit to the game or learn how to play their class on a very high level to be able to clear a raid like that. So yeah, I think it's out of whack, and I'm glad you brought up the outside of raid supplemental gear stuff.
Yeah, so whenever new stuff comes out, I sort of make it a point to focus on normal prog first with my team. Because when the LFR normal heroic mythic split first came in, that was the beginning of Warlords. And in Warlords, we got High Maul was first. And that raid was a very prototypical kind of intro tier. And it was accessible to our team on heroic, and it was good. It was fine. It was a pretty easy raid, all things considered. It was the first raid of an expansion, so it should be. And we didn't do normal. It didn't. I mean, I was told the people who make the game told me on the internet that if I was doing normal raiding now, then heroic raiding was for me, and so that's what we did. And then Blackrock Foundry came out. Blackrock Foundry was a really hard raid, and but
it had Hans of Franz in it, so I love it.
Yeah, I mean, I think Foundry is a very good raid, but it was very hard.
Yeah.
And I was just slamming Heroic with the team, and I shouldn't have been. We didn't have any seat time on Blackhand, and then we're trying to learn Blackhand on Heroic Blackhand, and that ended up, I don't have it in front of me. I'm not logged into the game. I don't use the same computer I used back then. I don't have stats, but like I feel like Heroic Blackhand was around 200 pulls for us, which is not acceptable for a Heroic end boss. And that was, to me, that was my fault because we should have been doing normal. We should have been gearing up through normal, and we should have been learning stuff like Blackhand mechanics on normal first. So anyway, that's my long cautionary tale about why I prioritize normal raiding when new raids come out for my Heroic raiding plus some mythic dabbling team. And we spent a fair bit of time this tier on who else but Anduin, right? And I had this thought and this experience, and I said this to the people I was playing with, like, what do normal teams do with this fight? Like, if your goal is normal raid clear, right? You want to kill the end boss of the tier on normal, like, what in the world were you doing with Anduin in March or April? And I don't know. I just felt bad for them because it's like, okay,
Yeah.
you're just going to get hard stuck on this boss for weeks until it gets significantly nerfed.
The example I would share about that, and because Ashvane's what keeps coming up, when we were raiding Mythic, and we'd moved on past Orgazoa to Twins or whatever was the two Naga that you fought at the same time. When we were doing, it's like count. If I can remember, it's count. Anyways, we were having people apply to our team who had been on Mythic Ashvane for more than 8 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
this is boss like 4 of 8 or something, or 5 of 8.
Yeah. And it was one of those cases where you're like, I feel terrible for you that your team is hard-walled and has been hard-walled on this boss for like 2 months. Like
2 months on a boss that isn't even close to the end boss of the it's not even
it was shocking to look at logs of team after team after, like, that's why like raid teams just disbanded. Like I think it killed like at least 100 raid teams, that boss. It was,
I'm sure, I mean, I remember, like, it was just a really terrible example of a roadblock boss.
But it's one of those cases where when you look at, you talking about 200 pulls on Blackhand, it's like, that shouldn't be a thing. And Ashvane shouldn't have been a thing the way it was. So I really hope that we don't see another boss like that in another raid tier ever. Give me a raid tier that starts at A and goes all the way down difficulty wise in a total straight kind of escalating arc. Don't give me these wall bosses. I don't want wall bosses. Don't do it.
No, and they've been. I feel like that sort of used to be the ethos once upon a time, that they would have these kind of peaks and valleys and sort of these, like, cooldown bosses, if you will. Like, ramp up to this hard boss in the middle of the raid, and then the next couple are kind of gimmies to get you ready for the next really hard boss. Yeah. That was like what they did on purpose for a while, and I feel like they don't do that as much anymore. But then they have these tuning anomalies like Ashvane or like Anduin that, no matter what your target difficulty is, like, you are going to get stuck on this boss. Yeah. Most teams are going to. So, yeah, it's, I definitely had that thought this tier that normal teams must really be suffering at the outset of this content release. And that kind of stinks because you don't have a lot of options, like, yes, you can do LFR, but like if you're a heroic team and you're kind of stuck, well, you do have that normal option. You can go down and do some organized raiding that still feels relevant. It could be rewarding, in terms of item level even, and you're going to get some relevant practice for your heroic pulls and stuff. But if you're a normal team, like, LFR is, yes, it's a thing you can do with your friends, and it does, like, I've done enough LFR this tier to know that, like, they have kept most of the mechanics in that, like, you need to pay attention to if you're trying to raid normal. Which is good, but it's, the environment is so chaotic that it could be hard to really glean how you're supposed to do a fight from doing it. So, yeah, it's got to be really, really tough on normal teams. And I do think that, like, the accessibility of very high item level gear via the Mythic Plus system has diminished normal and heroic rating across the board. Like, it's just not as attractive an activity. And I mean, this is something that I used to talk about on the show quite a bit, you know, that the Mythic Plus loot system was basically diminishing heroic rating as an activity in general because the rewards just weren't there. And I don't think it's really changed. I just feel differently about it now because it's obviously just the reality that they want to create for the game. So what do? I do as high Mythic Plus as I can, as much as I can until I'm kitted out. And then it helps me knock over heroic bosses. I'm not sure that that's like a great situation, but maybe in my case, like I am a pretty dedicated player. My skill level is decent. So, you know, I'm on a team that walks the line between heroic and mythic rating to some degree. And if everybody on my team did what I do with Mythic Plus, then maybe we would do more heroic bosses. You know, it's that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, Shoro also mentions having to kill, you know, 2 bosses to get a vault reward, and I don't think that's too bad. But you know, one thing we haven't talked about at all this expansion is the lack of bonus roll coins, and you know, I don't think the vault is a good replacement for bonus roll coins. The vault is better than the old box used to be, but bonus roll coins served a very particular function because it gave you a way to target loot from a boss that you wanted loot from in a particular loot spec and all that stuff. Like, I don't know. I can we live in a world where the Great Vault and bonus roll coins can peacefully coexist? I kind of think so. Like, I think you could do 2 bonus roll coins a week plus Great Vault and it not destroy the gearing process.
I would prefer to that the ability to buy a particular piece of boss loot for enough tokens that you get from the vault for not choosing loot from the vault. I would much prefer that.
That would be good too. I mean, that would be analogous to Titan Residuum in some ways, right?
Like if you get 20 tokens, which would be 3 weeks. Let's say 3 weeks. Actually, added 20. It doesn't add to 18, but whatever. Let's say for 18 tokens, you could just buy a piece of boss loot. Just buy it. Maybe it costs 22 or 20 or something to buy a piece of jailer or like final boss loot. But if you could just like off a boss you've killed, you can only buy pieces of loot off bosses you've killed. I think that'd be a great option where it's like, it's bad luck protection. It's Titan Residuum, you know, all over again of kill bosses regularly, do content regularly, get a choice at the end of the week of, hey, do I get lucky and get the piece I want out of my vault? Do I get lucky and get the piece I want off the boss? No. Okay, guess what? I take the tokens, and 2 weeks from now, if I just keep taking tokens, I'll be able to buy that exact piece that I want guaranteed. That, to me, is a better system.
Yeah, I think it's something that players want, right? I think the frustration with the random drop loot and especially with forced personal loot and the trading restrictions around it, which is something that I'm even sick of complaining about it at this point. And I know not everybody has these experiences or not everybody wants this stuff, but like to have it not even be an option for any group ever it just crushes people's enjoyment of the game. I feel it, and I play with enough people that do not enjoy these restrictions around loot and the way loot works. I think that, you know, a good reward system for loot, for itemization. Now, keep in mind, as far as we know about Dragonflight, these are your rewards. Your rewards are the things that your character equips, right? You're going to hit 70 and you're going to have your full complement of talents, and you're not getting power from anywhere else except the item level on your gear and the stats on it. So, you know, we live in this world where raid loot is like good luck. Yeah, kill Sylvanas 20 times. Did you get your domination socket shoulders? No. Come back a 21st time. Yeah. That's all we got for you.
Like, was it in your vault? Imagine if it existed for Garrosh shoulders back in the day.
Yeah. Well, right? The Garrosh shoulders were the Garrosh shoulders you're talking about. That was like a purely cosmetic
thing. It was, like, but I mean, imagine that stuff existed with, hey, guess what? Yeah. Or Invincible's Reigns, as opposed to just being a 0.1% drop. Imagine every time you killed Lich King, you got a token. And when you got 80 of those tokens, you could actually just buy the mount off of a vendor.
Right.
Like,
yeah, like if you wanted to just sort of do that instead, it would be like way more expensive than like gear, but it was like, okay, you want to, that's,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think having these kind of options would diminish the core kind of gameplay of, all right, you kill bosses and get rewards off of them. Like, I feel like they need a backstop for, I killed this boss 20 times and I never got the item I wanted. Like, I feel like, I know that's sort of been the history of the game, and that's how the game has worked at many points in time, but it's never been good. Like, talk about, I mean, going back to what Stoke was talking about in terms of sort of, building the business model out in a way that keeps people on the hook. I would still play the game if I could get the loot I wanted. I would just be happier when I was playing it.
exactly. Yeah.
And I don't know, there's been way too much frustration around it. I think this expansion, they turned the faucet off, right? BFA was like, loot was everywhere. You were getting loot from every source. It was high item level. You would do these like trivial activities and get really strong rewards, and they would Titan Forge and all this stuff. And they reined all that in. And I think they overcorrected a little bit too much at the outset. But now it's a bit of a different world because the Valor upgrade system is really good via Mythic Plus rating. The Creation Catalyst is one of the best itemization additions to the game they've ever had. And if this upgrading raid drop thing works out in Season 4 and that becomes like a part of the game, then I think we're moving in a good direction. I do think having a currency-based, backstop against just a terrible streak of luck is missing. I think bonus rolls are a way to do that. I think, currency per kill or per week or whatever is a way to do that and make it feel like players can accomplish their goal. I mean, you have a goal to maybe kill a particular boss or like get to a certain point in progression, yes, but you also have goals with your character in terms of items, your stats, your item level, even like just a transmog, and finishing a particular set or something. Like, come back next week and do it again is just not. It can't be the only answer forever. I feel like we just need more options.
Yeah. All right. With that, folks, we're going to wrap up episode 526 of The Starting Zone, this patron call-in show that we had going on. If you want to check out show notes for this episode, which is just a list of the questions that were asked on the show, or leave us a comment on the show, you can head on over to thestartingzone.com, the official website for the Starting Zone podcast. If you enjoyed the podcast, feel free to head over to your iTunes, Apple Podcasts, leave us a 5-star review. We really enjoy those, and they boost us up those charts, so we appreciate them. And if you want to contact the show and leave us your feedback or ask a question, you can email us at thestartingzone@gmail.com, or reach out to us on Twitter or over on our Discord, thestartingzone.com/discord. Our Patreon is over at patreon.com/thestartingzone, so feel free to head on over there if you want to join up and become a patron, support the show, get your questions in on these episodes that we do. And if you want to find some TSZ gear, you can find that over at TeePublic. That's teepublic.com/stores/thestartingzone, where there's frequently sales. I think there's one going on right now you can take advantage of if you're looking to buy some TSZ gear. And Jason, where can folks find you on the internet?
The best place to find me, as always, is over on Twitter. You can find me over there at Shieldwald. Always talking over them, getting into in and around WoW and other stuff. And you can also find me over on twitch.tv/Shieldwald, streaming WoW, raids, dungeons, Zereth Mortis stuff, who knows what else. I haven't been streaming the last couple of weeks, but I think maybe next week we might get back into it, but it is also going to be a truncated raid week because I'm going to miss one night of WoW, which would be a night of stream again. So I don't know, maybe in a couple of weeks we'll get back to it, but check it out. I'll get it going at some point soon. I just want to do it when I can be consistent, which has not been the case of late, but
right.
One of these days I'll get back on my normal schedule.
Right. If you're trying to find me, you can find me on Twitter at Spencer_Downey or over on Twitch at twitch.tv/SpencerHD. Next week, I probably won't be streaming very much. It's my 10-year wedding anniversary, so I'm going to be celebrating that on Tuesday, and I know we're not raiding, so I don't know what else I'd be streaming stuff. If anything, it wouldn't be until Friday, where we're potentially doing Brov Night stuff and having some fun with that. But with that, for Jason and myself, we want to say thanks for listening. And a big shout out and thank you to all of our patrons. And jobs done. Hi everyone, I'd like to take a moment to thank our patrons. They contribute a ton to our show and help us to improve on the content we create. Today I'm giving a special shout out to Arajian, Celian, Infark, Kapawi, Mibble the Mighty, Nick, and Shorel. Thank you! This sounder is for you.